The sound of the African bush waking up.
This week's podcast is a special. We have Robin Ricardo in South Africa. But just going back to podcast 76 about Yorkshire boarding, Phil, I understand that several listeners have emailed in and actually they beg to differ with your description of Yorkshire boarding.
Well, it's interesting, yes. I forget who it was who first said, I think it was one of your Nuffield Scholar colleagues who said that their idea of Yorkshire boarding was that it overlapped, but there were gaps within it, which may very well be right. I have been brought up to believe that...
How does that work?
What?
Is that
He's,
the
for
planks
those
of
listeners who
space.
can't see Farmer Phil, he's actually describing it with his hands and they're going like this. This is a audio file, Phil.
Oh, righto. It's very difficult to explain. So my idea of Yorkshire boarding is vertical planks nailed on the side of the barn with a gap between each plank about the thickness of the plank.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, it has been suggested to me that proper Yorkshire boarding had got the planks offset so that they overlap. So if you looked at it square on, you couldn't see through.
Right.
But round the sides of the spaced out planks were the gaps in between.
Clear as mud. So there we are. If ever you want to know about Yorkshire boarding, you must listen to the Wiggly Podcast. Perhaps you'd like to give us a review on iTunes about Yorkshire boarding. That would be just a jolly job, because the last review we had was the beginning of March.
Perhaps
so
it'd be handy if somebody from
listener?
Yorkshire told us what the hell Yorkshire boarding is.
Any Yorkshire listeners out there who know what Yorkshire boarding is, please come on down. So, Rich, tell us about your South African adventure just before we hear from the Botanical Gardens curator.
Okay. Oh, it was a great holiday. It all went very, very quickly. It doesn't seem as though I've been away, in fact, but I suppose that's a sign of a good holiday. But yeah, Cape Town, beautiful. I went to Robben Island where Nelson Mandela was incarcerated, and that was a really good trip because we were shown round by one of the old prisoners, because predominantly they were political prisoners. So anyway, this guy showed us around and he told us about his experience. He was put there when he was 16 years of age for 4 years and tortured relentlessly because he was a student activist. I mean, how grim is that? But also went diving with great whites. That was fantastic.
You got your diving exam sorted, did you?
Eventually I sorted that. But we saw 7 different fish, and the biggest we saw was 4.5 metres long, about 2 tons. 2 tons, and that was a big kipper. That was a big fish. So that was a great experience.
Were you in a cage?
Yeah, in a cage. Yeah. I was in
Probably
a cage,
the best thing after what you've done to various other fish. There could have been a bit of retribution.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, but I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think I've quite got the guts to go free diving with great whites. I mean, free diving with sharks, certain species, fine, but great whites, I'm not that confident. You know, I don't think.
Remember
I'm not there yet.
The ladder.
Yes, absolutely. Remember the ladder. And then we went. We had a couple of days on safari, and there's a lovely recording that the listener may well have listened to, in fact, about the African bush just waking up. But we stayed in these fantastic little lodges ensconced in the bush, overlooking a beautiful lush river valley with lots of acacias and all sorts of really interesting shrubs. You go on a game drive in the evening, come back, little bottle of bubbly on ice by the bath. The bath overlooked the beautiful lush vegetation. Oh, beautiful. Bed done down, just before you go to bed, living little joggy treats on the thing. We went inland. We drove through some mountain fires one day to go to a place called Prince Albert, which is in the Klein Karoo. That was great. A lot of really interesting architecture.
Oh, get on with it. What are we going to hear about?
And you're so rude.
You're
so rude. I have missed you.
I was going to say that he's got so enthusiastic about it. All thoughts of carbon footprints have gone out of the window.
Yeah. Well, interesting carbon footprint theory. But the interview that I managed to get was from the curator of Kirstenbosch Gardens. He was a lovely bloke, and he told me about the creation of what is a World Heritage Site. Well worth listening to.
Fantastic. God, he goes on, doesn't he? Here we are.
John, I'd like to say first of all, thank you very much for meeting me and spending a bit of time to come and chat to me. We're walking up a beautifully spongy lawn in the Botanical Gardens in Kirstenbosch in Cape Town, and as I look out, the sun's beaming down on me. Beautiful. It's kind of an autumnal afternoon, isn't it? Really?
Yes.
And literally, the mountains are rising above us. What are those called, John? Those mountains?
Well, this is part of Table Mountain, but this is known as Castle Rock, the one directly in front of us. And in the gorge on the right is Skeleton Gorge, and on the left is Nursery Gorge.
Right.
And this is a very popular access route up to the top of the mountain.
Right, okay. It is absolutely beautiful. They're really craggy gorges, aren't they?
Yes.
They're littered with greenery, and it is very green, isn't it?
Well, fortunately, we have water, and it rains in the winter because we have a Mediterranean climate, and there's always enough rain to fill our catchment dam.
Right.
So consequently, we have sufficient water to irrigate.
Right.
And that's why the lawns look so good. They irrigate them at night, and it's all computerised.
So you've spent many years working here, haven't you?
Yes. Well, since 1967.
Right.
And that's about, 34 years, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a reasonable amount of time. So in that time,
maybe too long.
Yeah. Some might say. Yeah. Some might say certainly. But I mean, you must have seen a lot of changes in that time.
Yes, lots of changes. Well, we didn't have an irrigation system when I came here.
Right. Why was it started? Why were the Botanical Gardens started originally?
Well, it was started in 1913, and the people at the time realised the need to have a botanic garden because of the wealth of the flora in this country.
So how significant is the Botanical Gardens with regards to the flora found in the Western
Cape? It's probably the most important botanic garden in southern Africa, particularly to the flora is concerned. But Kirstenbosch is one of 8 gardens in the organisation.
Right.
They established regional gardens in the 1970s, between 1970 and 1980. So you have a garden in Betty's Bay, which is about an hour's drive from here, on the way to Hermanus. And then you've got one in Worcester, which is a desert garden. And you have one.
Whereabouts is Worcester?
Worcester is just over the Hex River Mountains, and just into the drier part of the country.
Okay, we've just spun round and we've got a whole new view in front of us, haven't we? It's incredible.
You're now looking east.
Right.
Yes.
That's absolutely astonishing. So the plateau is sort of infilled with what is Cape Town, I guess.
That's right, yes.
And it rises above into these splendid kind of, I don't know, it's almost like a circle of ruggedy mountains.
It's the Hex River Mountains.
Right, okay.
And then you have gardens in Bloemfontein, which is in the centre of the country. And you have one in Natal, at Pietermaritzburg. And then, of course, in Pretoria, where the capital of the country, there's a botanic garden there. And again in Nelspruit, which is not far from the Kruger National Park.
Right.
It's sort of subtropical. And the other garden is just on the East Rand, which is not far from Johannesburg.
Right.
It's the Walter Sisulu Botanic Garden. And all those gardens are relatively young, apart from the Pietermaritzburg Garden, which is probably the oldest. I think it's over 100 years old, which is old for us.
Yeah,
but Kirstenbosch is only, 1913, you see, so it's got a few years to go before it gets to the century.
Right. Yeah,
and the others all started as I said, between the 70s and 80s, when they had this whole big drive. The director at the time wanted to develop these regional gardens, and so this is the main botanic garden. There are other botanic gardens which are run by the local government, like the Durban Botanic Garden in Durban itself.
Yeah. It's how many species of plants are there all told in this garden?
No, I can't tell you offhand, because they continually out collecting, because the policy for the organisation is to grow the flora of southern Africa, the indigenous species. So we don't really grow the exotics from other countries, but although you see the oaks and that sort of thing, but they're here historically because this was a farm before the garden was developed.
Right.
And so they've retained these oak trees.
So it's superb, in fact, the way you say that all these species, the species in this garden are effectively native species, so they're indigenous to the Cape.
The majority, yes.
Right.
No, of the whole of the country, not only the Western Cape, Southern Cape. Yeah.
Okay, I was just saying to you earlier on, it conjures up images of we've got a couple of places in the UK that called Gardens of Helligan, and the Eden Project, based down in the southwest of England, which is a relatively mild county. And there's a chap that's set them up, or at least had a goodly hand in setting them up, called Tim Smith. And I know he makes frequent visits over here, and I think when I look round, I think he's definitely drawn some of his inspiration from here, for sure, because there are similarities, you know. But when I look around, you know, there's a lot of colours, a lot of vivid colours as well, you know, for the time of year, because this is your autumn, isn't it?
Yes, we're coming into the early autumn now. We've been fortunate this summer. Normally the summers are quite dry, but this summer we've had rains at sort of regular intervals, which really helps generally the countryside. But as I said earlier, the garden has a big catchment dam, and they have sufficient water to irrigate the garden. Yeah. So that's why it's looking so green. And I think well-kept lawns always help a great deal with the garden.
I think you're absolutely right. What about the oaks, though? Where did they come from originally?
When the early settlers came, they used all the local timber for the ships and for building and this sort of thing. And eventually they started running out of timber, and so therefore they started bringing in species from all over the world, like eucalyptus and acacias and poplar and oaks.
Okay.
And this is how it all happened. And then, of course, they started growing these things in order to produce timber, because they needed timber.
Yeah.
Because in South Africa we don't have big trees.
Right.
Our trees don't. The yellowwoods are probably some of the biggest, but nothing like some of the European trees and American trees, which get quite substantial.
Sure.
And so we needed these exotic trees for timber in those days.
Yeah, I was amazed yesterday. Sarah and I came up here for the first time, and we saw oaks, and Sarah said, that's the size of these oaks. You know, that's kind of reminiscent of something that you'd see in Herefordshire, where I come from. Exactly. The whole county is prolifferated in trees very similar to that.
Yeah. So, well, you know, the thing is, as I said, this was a farm, and then the farmers, I presume, you know, there's still remnants of avenues where they obviously planted oaks, but then they also planted oaks because at the time they were farming with pigs, and of course the feed that the pigs lived on were the acorns.
Right.
And so this is how, and then of course Cecil John Rhodes introduced the grey squirrel.
Right.
And he's now dominant here.
It's funny you say that in the UK, because the grey squirrels and their hordes are driving out the indigenous populations of reds.
That's it.
They carry all sorts of hideous diseases and whatnot, very aggressive species.
But you know, with all these trees here, and then with the squirrels, in this part of the world we have problems with what we call alien vegetation. It's mainly Australian, the acacias.
Right.
And they just take over. And we've had big programs here at Kirstenbosch in the upper reaches of clearing all these alien vegetation, which was mainly acacia, and of course the oaks up in those natural regions are also spread by the squirrels. They take the acorns up into the higher regions, and so this is how they spread.
Yeah, sure.
So we have to control all that. And
I think some people would say, "Oh, well, why bother controlling them?" But actually, I think, you know, because it's the human hand that's caused the problem in the first place. So it's the human hand that should rectify it, isn't it? In many respects.
Well, the acacias are very aggressive, what we call Port Jackson, and they just smother the natural vegetation, which is the fynbos here in the Western Cape, and it's a real major problem. And if you go onto the Cape Flats, which we're looking at, there's a lot of it, and originally the entire Cape Flats was covered in Port Jackson.
Right.
And I suppose it served its purpose at the early days, trying to stabilise the sand dunes and that sort of thing. But they become a problem with our native vegetation, and so we've had to remove it, and we've been very successful here at Kirstenbosch. If you go up into the upper reaches, we just see the odd plant.
And I mean, how significant is Kirstenbosch in kind of in relation to the ecology of South Africa? I mean, how is it considered? How is it looked upon?
Well, I think very favourably. We try to. As I say, we grow the native species, and when it comes to the ecology itself, we try to go along with nature and protect the flora and everything that's here. We also have fauna here too, various animals which.
I noticed a couple of fantastic wasps as we started to walk up. You know, great big long, almost similar to a kind of something like a pine wasp that we'd see at home.
Yeah.
But they were wood boring wasps, weren't they?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
And those are stunning creatures. What else would you see here?
Porcupine.
Really?
On occasions we've had baboon here.
There's a big wasp there, look, flying across. That's a stunning creature.
Yes.
The other thing I noticed that what we don't have at home are birds that pollinate flowers, not specifically.
Yes.
But I noticed here, I read earlier on that the ericas and the proteas, which are absolutely beautiful plants in their own right, I think they're kind of specifically pollinated by sunbirds.
That's right. Yes. And if you want to see them, you go higher up. We have the protea garden, erica garden.
Right.
And you can see these birds in action. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think we're probably going to wander up there now and have a look.
But apart from the gardens, we have a very big research element in the organisation.
Right.
And they do a lot of work in terms of global warming and this sort of thing.
Right. How big is the site all told? How many acres does it cover?
Over 500 hectares. It goes right up to the top of the mountain.
Right.
There are about 17 kilometres of trails.
Really?
Yes, in the natural forest up there.
That's huge.
It's really, it's big.
Massive, yeah.
But the garden itself is only about 50 hectares, the developed garden.
Right. Only 50 hectares.
Well, in comparison to the Bell.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
And the general public, really, as you can see, the topography is interesting. It's not flat.
No, it's not.
So therefore, you can't just keep on developing up the hill, because the general public, the majority, don't like walking. They want to be comfortable, and you don't want to put them to too much strain.
No, sure, yeah. There's a balance.
Of course, there's always the opportunity to walk the trails, which people can do,
A topography like this, though, is so much more interesting than flat, isn't it? You've got a massive diversity of species, but of interest. The topography, I think, makes all the difference.
Yes, but we've also, you've got to cater for wheelchairs and this type of thing. This is actually quite important.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to make sure that everybody's welcome and accommodated for.
Yeah, for sure.
They have a braille trail here for the blind and that sort of thing, which also then hopefully can be used by those who have difficulty in seeing.
Yeah. So what did you find when you were working here? You say you left the organisation for the majority of time in 2001, and now you spend your time here on a voluntary basis.
That's right. Yeah.
What did you find yourself doing a lot of when you were fully employed here?
Well, I was the curator of the garden.
Right, okay.
So I spent most of my time in the office, unfortunately.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yes, but I had interests. I mean, there were stages I had interest in ericas and diazes. That's orchid.
Right.
Pride of Table Mountain. I don't know if it's a very spectacular. Well, I met you at the information there, where some diazes on the counter there. You can see they're quite a sort of red flowers, very attractive.
Absolutely.
And yes, I've had, and also interest in cycads.
Right.
Yeah. But I've never when I was working, I never had much time to get involved with that. And latterly, just before I retired, I got involved with clivia. I spent some time collecting because we didn't have
what do they look like?
It's a bulbous plant. In nature, they grow in shade in the forests.
Right.
And they are predominantly known for their orange flowers, but you get quite a range in them nowadays with the breeding and collecting that's taking place. You get yellows through to peaches and that sort of thing. And there are about 6 different species in the genus, so it's not a big species, genus.
Right. It was interesting when I was walking around, because you kind of imagine that you travel this far and then everything that you saw was alien, because it doesn't quite work like that now, does it? And there are many species of plant. The things that look a bit like foxgloves, digitalis, and also there are other species or genus that look a bit like scabiosas.
What is scabiosa, the blue one?
Right,
it's the same genus. It is.
And you've got these. I mean, the guys here, these very vivid orange-looking plants. Look very much like marigolds.
It's an octotus. It is.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are
summer flowering octotus. But our main colour display is in the spring and early spring, with all the spring flowering annuals.
Sure. Right.
And then there's a very big bulb collection, and also a big succulent collection.
Right.
But that's mainly in the conservatory.
I've got to say, I mean, I could recommend this place to anybody, any of our listeners that you're considering a trip to Cape Town. You should definitely come here because it's superb. It's very, it is unique. And what I will say, John, is thank you very much for having a chat with me, and I look forward to. And you should listen to this as well. See how it turns out, because you can listen. You literally go onto the website. No, it's still going. It's still going.
Oh, but you can edit it, can you?
It can be edited, but Michael tends to edit. He's absolutely superb, but he's slightly idiosyncratic, and he has an interesting choice of what he edits.
Oh, I see, okay.
So when I present him with this recording, it remains to be seen as to what he decides to edit.
Yeah.
But anyway, John, thank you very much.
No, great
indeed.
pleasure.
That was fantastic, Rich. You didn't go on in that at all. Right, for those listeners who missed last week's competition, this is how it is. We have got the most wonderful Wiggly cap to give away and our book. And if you listen to this sound and tell us what it is and get it right, it's yours. If you come out of the hat, it's yours. Email Richard at Wiggly Wigglers, Heather at wigglyWigglers.co.uk. Go to our blog, leave us a message, do whatever you like. You'll find out at the website, but let us know what you think this is. Over to Monty for his wormcast before we end this week's podcast.
Monty's Worm Facts by Mastos parvus, the American barkworm. It's quite small, at less than 2 centimetres long.
So next week's show, dear listener, remember, is going to be a video. So I hope you've got your video iPod ready or your computer set to video, because it's gonna be a corker. We've already recorded it. I know it's fantastic. I am lying, but it will be good. How to set up your can of worms from Wiggly Wigglers. Bye from me, Heather.
Bye. And bye from me, Farmer Phil.
Hope Michael's video recorder works.